Space was so cold. Despite the planet exploding and the giant supernova that had since dissipated, all that heat had spread out, trying to warm the vacuum of space, but to no avail. In that sense, Cooler was exactly the same. He wanted to make a change, to fundamentally dismantle the ways of his father and provide a lighter path for the Empire. But, of course, it wouldn't be that easy. He hoped Frieza would understand, or that all his training would have paid off, but it was all for naught. And now here he was, floating in the vastness of space, his body so damaged it was hardly recognizable, if he could even see, that is. Cooler suffered intense burns to his whole body, making it so his eyes were basically useless, while the rest of his body could hardly feel anything. The parts of him that could feel were in intense pain, the nearby sun only aggravating the burns thanks to its unblocked UV rays. The Frostling thought this was the end of him, that this would be his final resting place, and how tragic that was. All he wanted to do was protect his friends and comrades, and possibly even his brother. Yet, he was betrayed by his own family, and now he died knowing most of his men were dead, or would be hunted down by the Frieza Force. He had failed on all accounts. He tried to be cordial, tried to be a nice guy, and this was where it got him. But fate must have had other plans for him, as what he could only identify as a ship picked him up. At first, Cooler thought it was Salsa and the others, but when he felt cold metal touching him, he knew this had to be someone, or something, else. Over time, Cooler felt needles prick him before falling asleep, and once he awoke, he had his hearing back. Around him there was a cacophony of metal clangs, the sound of hulking beasts walking in metal hallways, and people welding alloys together with an occasional electric buzz off in the distance. It wasn't particularly pleasant, but the Frostling was relieved he could hear again. He tried asking for help whenever he heard beings nearby, but was always ignored, until of course he was pricked once more. The whole time he focused on trying to get better, but the image of Frieza betraying him never left his mind. This went on for weeks, with him waking up each time feeling better, but ultimately different. Firstly, he awoke with the ability to feel his body, but that wasn't exactly a good thing. By the time the next injection came, Cooler was practically begging for it, for anything to stop the pain. The next time he awoke, the pain was gone, but his body felt different. It was as if he were wearing armor, or thick clothing all over his body. His sense of touch was dulled, yet he could still feel he was touching things, such as his hospital bed and his body proper, though instead of feeling fleshy bits, he felt cold metal. So, the burns were so bad he needed prosthetics, huh? Well, it certainly wasn't what he preferred, but if it meant he could survive, he'd deal with it. Finally, the Iceling awoke with his sight, though the room he was in looked like a normal hospital room, if it weren't for its green tint. Cooler examined his body first, seeing the shining metal now attached to himself. It seemed very little of his original body was left, though he was still breathing, so there must be some biological parts there. He shakily stood up, getting used to the prosthetic legs. It sort of felt like when his legs used to fall asleep, though without the pins and needles. He made his way to the sink, looking at the person in the mirror and no longer recognizing them. Sure, there was a resemblance, but he was practically a robot, and his eyes were nothing but cameras now. He hated the state he was in now. Hated Cold for doing this. No. He hated Frieza for doing this to him. But this brief thought was interrupted when a small robot, only about 5 feet tall, opened the door to his room. The Iceling quickly turned around, nearly falling in the process, and pointed his hand at the bot. Who are you? Where am I? Why do you and your people ignore me this whole time?
I'm B1268, but you can call me 268 for short. The master instructed me to be your personal trainer today. Now, we have a lot to go through, so we have to be quick.
The robot moved towards Cooler on its tracks, though the Iceling stepped back, still holding his hand up towards it. I'm serious. I need to know what this place is. And what about my men? What of Frieza and the Saiyans? I know that Elec was up to something with them.
Oh, put that thing down. In your state, it's probably super heavy. Unlike us, you're made of meat, all squishy and weak.
Cooler didn't like being called weak, but 268 was correct. This prosthetic arm was heavy, and after laying around for weeks, even standing took a lot out of him. Speaking of which, how long had he been out? He asked the robot, only to find out he's been here for years. Practically a decade, in fact. What? It couldn't be that long. He was only out for 2 weeks tops. Cooler begins to hyperventilate, running past the robot and opening the door to the outside. Unfortunately, he was only met with a large metallic hallway with faint blue lights lighting them. He went to run down the hall, but his feet slipped and he fell on the ground, sending a wave of pain throughout his body, something he thought he wouldn't be able to feel anymore. 268 helped the Iceling up, telling him it was silly to try running like that, but Cooler was too busy thinking about what he'd missed. By now, Frieza could have conquered thousands of worlds, no, millions, and slaughtered an untold number of beings. And his crew, where were they? Did they think he was dead this whole time? Did they move on already? Or perhaps those Ginyu guys already destroyed them? Maybe by now, Cooler was really the only one left. The last revolutionary in his failed cause.
Hey, Fleshbag, you look pretty sad. According to the master and my data, exercise helps boost your mood. Let's try a nice slow walk, huh?
But Cooler was having none of it. He smacked 268 with his tail, sending him flying into the wall. But then he processed the fact that that robot had a master. Could this person be an actual living being like him? If so, Cooler had to meet this person. The Iceling helped his robot guide up, who dusted himself off and explained who this master was. Firstly, 268 needed to make sure Cooler was trained up before he could meet this master person. The Iceling didn't exactly like this deal, but decided being able to move properly was a good idea. He allowed 268 to bring him to a large gym-like room filled with various equipment used to aid recovery. While Cooler felt he didn't exactly need this level of recovery, he still went along with 268, letting the robot walk him through all the steps. Whilst Cooler's prosthetics were certainly advanced, he realized getting used to them would be far harder than he initially believed. The robotic bits of his body occasionally took too long to respond, though not because they were lagging, it was more due to his own mobility. Cooler found himself tiring out quickly, and moving began to hurt after a while, as if the metal were rubbing up against his skin. That's where 268 revealed Cooler wasn't a cyborg. Instead, he was basically just wearing a suit, almost like Iron Man, in a sense. It made sense to the Iceling, though he wondered why not just replace his organic parts if they were so badly damaged. 268 had no idea, but figured the master would be able to answer all these questions, and so the two kept on training. It took quite some time, what felt like months, but Cooler eventually returned to normal, or as normal as he could be. He couldn't quite punch as hard nor fly as fast as he could before, but he could move comfortably now. The suit occasionally pinched or rubbed against his body, but Cooler got used to the pain and had become strong enough to move properly, meaning this happened less often. 268 finally agreed that he was ready, and the two made their way down a maze of hallways towards the master. As they went deeper into this ship or base or whatever it was, the walls turned from sleek metal into a mess of exposed wires and other robotic parts. There were also other robots now skidding around the halls, most of which looked just like 268 and carried chunks of metal or construction equipment. Finally, though, Cooler and 268 made it to a large round door guarded by two hulking robots, both having a single red eye. They stepped aside and opened the door, leading to a room oddly reminiscent of Cold's old throne room, though it was far darker and much more metallic. Within the middle of the room was a throne, and sitting atop it, a figure hidden in shadow. Cooler's eyes began to brighten the room, though, using different camera lenses to see better in the dark, and as the figure began to take shape, the Iceling was left stunned. Sitting in the throne was an Iceling, though they were scarred and damaged, much like Cooler himself. They had a mask over their face and many wires and vine-like metal pieces covering him, but he had those same horns and an orange gem on his head. The throne, if you could call it that, was a chair filled with syringes, all of which appeared to be stuck into the figure, injecting a light blue liquid into it. Cooler couldn't form words. He knew this wasn't Cold or Frieza, but who was this? What did they want with him? Why save him from that dying planet?
You have questions, but my time is not long. I've held out this long to greet you in my mortal form, but I fear my end is near. Our conversation must be quick then. Ask your most important questions before I am no more. Who are you? And why was I brought here?
Cooler stepped forward, trying to make out what he could of the Iceling's face.
I am the one formerly known as Lord Frigid, but those nobles, our wicked bloodline, took everything away from me. So you may call me Frigid. Just Frigid.
The room seemingly shook as this figure stood, his fists clenched.
Based on your reaction, records of me must have been scrubbed. Young man, I am your uncle, brother to that tyrant Cold, and son of the traitorous Ice.
Cooler's eyes widened as the figure stepped into the light, sporting cybernetic eyes himself. Indeed, he was an Iceling, and from here Cooler recognized this as the second form, or the form Cold often occupied. There was a slight resemblance to his father, but the cybernetic implants covered most of Frigid's face.
As for why you're here, it's time to stop Frieza and Cold once and for all. You acted just as I did in the past. However, Cold saw to it that another rebellion would never arise, starting with his own son, it seems. But unlike me, you could be saved, brought back to prominence to continue the rebellion.
Frigid raised a scarred fist into the air, but Cooler had no idea how he could possibly win against Cold, let alone Frieza in this state.
True, your battle power is lower than before, far lower, and some of your potential was burned away with your body. But all is not lost. The Big Gete Star, the facility we're in now, will help us in our quest for vengeance. It's the reason I was able to live, as is the same for yourself. I've been developing something to help you, and with the energy from this newest planet, I finally had the resources to develop them. Now, Come, hurry, take them before I pass.
Frigid reached out to Cooler, the metal on his arms coming to life and moving onto his palm. Cooler was a bit hesitant, but if this gave him the power to defeat Frieza and make a better empire, then he'd take them. He shakes hands with Frigid, the metal moving onto his own hand before spreading throughout his suit. Soon this living metal made its way to his skin and began almost bonding with it, forming a newer second layer of skin, but also binding with his own metal suit. This was incredible. Whatever this metal was, it felt as if it were a part of him, and made the suit feel the same way. But this would have to wait as Frigid spoke once more.
Thank you. You shall avenge me.
The outer iceling then fell to the ground before several metal wires attached to him, dragging his body off into the abyss. Cooler was unsure of what to do, but 268 shrugs this off and says Frigid left a set of instructions for the iceling, starting with getting to the ship. The two traveled down to the hangar bay where a small spacecraft was waiting for them. It isn't huge, but it's enough to live in for a couple weeks. Once inside, the pair begin to fly off, with Cooler finally getting a good look at whatever planet he's been on. The planet is left ravaged and broken, with the Big Gete Star sunk into it. While he dislikes this method, he deemed it a necessary evil, and left it at that. Next up, 268 said they were to travel to some planet named Vampa, but Cooler denied this, saying he needed to find his crew first. 268 didn't understand why he needed to do that. Frigid and the supercomputer came up with the perfect plan. There was no need to stray from it. But Cooler disagreed. He wasn't following the supercomputer's plan. He was doing things his own way, but promised he'd stop Frieza all the same. 268 accepted these parameters, but said they should still travel to Vampa, and Cooler agreed to meet in the middle, get his crew first, then they go to Vampa. On a far-off planet, a Frieza Force freighter was pulling into a small base, delivering their supplies for the month. The garrison troops were rather bored, so most of them turned up to meet the pilots, eager to hear any space rumors of what's been going on in the galaxy. They're surprised, though, when the freighter opens up to reveal warriors clad in black Frieza Force armor. The warrior front and center introduces himself as Salsa before activating his key saber and charging the men. A brief scuffle ensues between Salsa, Naze, Dori, and Flake, and the Force members. The men are knocked out pretty easily, and the group rushes inside the base, searching for their command room. There, Salsa has Naze hack into their database and search for any records of Cooler while he searches the prisoner database. Ultimately, nothing comes of this search. Despite this being the perfect place to raid, it yielded no results in the Cooler section. But that doesn't mean they didn't get any information. Naze managed to find reports of a small unknown ship carrying a single, very powerful individual. But that's where the reports stop, as all the men perish before they can get anything else. Salsa tells Naze to download this information before calling Flake and Dore, who were off fighting the remaining soldiers. The crew leave the newly liberated planet while Naze finishes decrypting the information, him programming the ship's last known coordinates in their navigation drive. Salsa knew this had to be Cooler. This was their last lead. If it wasn't him, then these past few years were for nothing. With the reunion of the armored squadron and their leader on the horizon, that's where we'll be leaving things off for right now. If you enjoyed this part, I'd appreciate it if you save the like button or maybe even rebuild the subscribe button. But even if you don't, I appreciate you guys making it this far into the video. Wow. I knew this series would be something special, but I never thought it'd be as popular, or as dark as it turned out to be. Sure, having Frieza and Cold betray Cooler was dark, but things really took a turn here. How do you guys feel about Frigid and the Big Gete Star? And what about Cooler and his new quest for revenge? I'm super excited to get the next part written. This series turned out to be pretty darn fun. Also, shout out to you guys once again for absolutely blowing up part 1. And once again, getting us to over 400 subs. Truly, we're already 1/4 of the way to 500. You guys are absolutely insane. Anyways, you guys have a good day or night wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye-bye.